Black boy kicked out of dealership. Next day, his billionaire mom arrives in a Rolls Royce. The rain had barely started when Roman Hayes walked back to his car, shoulders low, folder clenched in one fist. The sliding glass doors of Westbridge Automart shut behind him with a soft hiss, but the sting on his pride was louder than any thunder that might follow. He sat in the driver's seat of the family's beat-up Honda CR-V, hands gripping the wheel, jaw locked tight. He hadn't said a word, not when the sales rep looked past him like he was invisible, not when they suggested he try the lot down the road, because cars here might be out of your price range. Not even when one guy chuckled under his breath as he walked off with the words, "You kids watch too many rap videos." Roman didn't explode. He didn't throw his folder or demand to speak to the manager. That wasn't him. He just stared through the windshield, rain tapping lightly against the glass, and wondered how it all flipped so fast, from hope to humiliation. The twist? He could have bought any damn car on the lot. Cash. And they didn't know who his mom was. Roman, freshly 18, had just graduated from Northview STEM Academy in Chattanooga, Tennessee. A National Merit Scholar, full ride to Caltech. Quiet, focused, raised by a mother who taught him never to flaunt what he had, but always know what he was worth. He didn't grow up around excess, even if it was available. His mom believed in letting the world underestimate them, and then making it regret doing so. Which is why the next morning, when Dr. Sienna Hayes rolled her midnight blue Rolls-Royce Ghost into Westbridge Automart, the receptionist's hand froze mid-keystroke. The car gleamed like it had its own spotlight, untouched by the grime of the highway. It idled in front of the dealership like a warning. But that moment wasn't here yet. Not yet. Rewind 24 hours. Thursday, late morning. The sky hung heavy with moisture, summer storms brewing somewhere over the hills outside Chattanooga. Roman had been up since 6 a.m., combing through used hybrid listings, cross-checking VINs, calculating miles per gallon like it was his final project. He wasn't flashy, just practical. That morning he wore a gray zip-up, black athletic joggers, and some old white Adidas with frayed laces. Tucked under his arm was a blue plastic folder filled with 5 car listings, 3 Civics, a Prius, and a Ford Fusion hybrid, each one under $18,000. All reasonable, all researched, all paid for if they'd just give him the time of day. As he walked into the glass-walled dealership off I-75, he held the door open for an older woman carrying car keys and Starbucks. She smiled. The receptionist inside didn't. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyes flicking up for a fraction of a second before returning to her screen. Roman gave a polite nod. "Yeah, I saw some listings on your site. Just wanted to take a look at a few of your used hybrids." He lifted the folder. "I printed out the details." The woman's eyebrows barely twitched. "Are your parents with you?" "No, ma'am. I'm the buyer." She stared at him for half a beat longer than she should have, then gave a tight smile. "Someone will be with you shortly." But no one came. He waited. 15 minutes. He stood by the glass, watching the lot outside. The silver Civic he'd researched, matching VIN, was parked right where it should be. He stepped outside toward it, folder in hand. That's when the red polo shirt showed up. "Can I help you?" the salesman asked. His name tag said Eric, but his tone said something else. Roman smiled faintly. "Yeah, just checking out this Civic. Saw it online. I have a few others, too." He offered the folder. Eric didn't even glance at it. His eyes were locked on Roman's windbreaker, his scuffed shoes. "We've had people come through here taking pics of cars, posting listings they don't own. Caused some trouble." "I'm not doing that," Roman said calmly. "I just wanted to see the car, maybe test drive it." You here with a parent? Number I'm buying for myself. Eric's lips curled. You have financing? I'm paying cash. Eric folded his arms. Look, man, I'm not trying to be rude, but we've had issues. What kind of issues? Roman asked, his voice still quiet. People wasting time, thinking they can get something they can't afford. It's not a place to hang out. Roman blinked slowly. So you're saying I should leave? I'm saying maybe another dealership would be a better fit, Eric replied. There's a used lot down the road. Might be more in your budget. Roman didn't move. He looked down at the folder in his hand, then back at the Civic. His jaw tightened. He turned without a word and walked back to his car. That evening, Sienna Hayes found him at the kitchen table, laptop open, listings on the screen. How'd it go? She asked, dropping her bag and pulling out leftovers from the fridge. Roman shrugged. Went to Westbridge. The cars looked good. Did you test drive anything? No. She paused. Why not? They told me to come back with a parent, said they had incidents with people like me. I guess I looked like a waste of time. Sienna froze, not out of rage, out of recognition. She sat across from him. Did they say anything specific? Not exactly, just didn't take me seriously. Sienna nodded slowly. You said you were paying cash? Yeah. She exhaled through her nose and stood up, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. It's okay, Roman said. I didn't want to cause a scene. She didn't respond. Not right away. Upstairs, she opened her office laptop, poured a glass of Cabernet, and made one call to a former colleague at a regional banking firm who now handled asset insurance for local commercial properties. She asked a simple question. Who owns Westbridge Automart? By morning, she had the name, the manager, and a full staff org chart. She didn't tell Roman. He was still asleep. At 9:12 a.m., the double doors to Westbridge whooshed open, and everything that dealership thought it knew about customers changed. But that's chapter 2. The receptionist didn't notice the car at first. She was too busy fixing her lipstick in the reflection of her computer screen. But then the glass doors to Westbridge Automart slid open, and a wave of silence seemed to move through the lobby like a ripple. The Rolls-Royce Ghost pulled up to the curb as if it owned it. Not just the space, the dealership, the land beneath it. It wasn't flashy in the way people imagined wealth to be. There were no neon colors or revving engines. The car was so immaculate, so understatedly powerful, it felt like a statement made in a whisper everyone could hear. The receptionist finally looked up and froze. Out of the car stepped a woman with the kind of presence that made people stop mid-sentence. Her name was Dr. Sienna Hayes, 42, CEO of Mavros Biotech. A woman who had given TED Talks, sat on policy boards in D.C., and once negotiated a multi-million-dollar deal entirely in French. But right now, she wasn't a doctor or a CEO or a leader in biotech. She was Roman's mom. And she was livid, not in the explosive, yelling kind of way. No, Sienna's anger had edges so sharp it could cut through the room just by the way she stood. Navy pantsuit, heels that didn't make a sound on the tile, silver watch, and a face so calm it made people nervous. Good morning, she said, placing her handbag gently on the counter. The receptionist blinked. Good morning. Are you here for a service appointment? No, Sienna said. I'm here to speak with the general manager. Right away. Within 60 seconds, a man appeared from the hallway behind the showroom, pressed shirt, Bluetooth in one ear, fake casual smile already set in place. Dan Malcolm, mid-40s, general manager. The kind of man who'd survived this industry, not by being excellent, but by knowing when to shift the blame. Hi there, I'm Dan. How can I help you today? Sienna didn't shake his hand. You had an interaction with my son yesterday, Roman Hayes, 18, black, gray windbreaker. printed out listings from your site, came here with the intent to buy a car. Dan's smile froze for half a second before slipping into the usual corporate apology face. Ah, I think I remember him. There might have been a bit of confusion. I wasn't made aware of any issues. We get a lot of traffic. It's possible he misread. Sienna held up her hand. Let me stop you. He walked in prepared, respectful and financially ready to buy. He waited, was ignored, and then was told to try a different lot. Your sales rep never even looked at his paperwork. Dan's eyes flicked toward the receptionist, then back to Sienna. Well, if your son felt disrespected, I'd be happy to offer him a more personalized visit. Maybe I could walk him through our... That won't be necessary, she said. Her tone didn't change. That somehow made it worse. I don't want an apology, Sienna added. I want understanding. Because here's the part that should concern you, Mr. Malcolm. It's not just that you dismissed a paying customer. It's that you dismissed him because of how he looked, and that decision didn't just cost you a sale. It cost you your credibility. Dan swallowed hard. We're not in the business of discrimination. If anything came across that way, it wasn't intentional. You don't have to intend a thing to be responsible for it, Sienna said. You just have to let it happen. There was a beat of silence. Sienna reached into her bag and pulled out a black business card. Minimalist. Clean. Her name embossed in silver. She placed it on the counter like a final chess move. I didn't come here because Roman asked me to. He didn't even want me to. That's the kind of man I raised, but I came here because you need to understand something very clearly. Dan glanced down at the card. Dr. Sienna Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, Mavros Biotech. His breath hitched. Mavros wasn't just a biotech company. It was one of the most cutting-edge firms in the country, with government contracts, private research partnerships, and press coverage from Forbes to Bloomberg. Sienna leaned in slightly. Next time a young black man walks into your dealership with a folder full of listings, try seeing a potential customer before you see a stereotype. You didn't just lose a sale yesterday. You lost the trust of someone who has influence, power, and more eyes on her than you'll ever know. Then she turned, picked up her bag, and walked out. The only sound was the soft click of her heels and the low hum of the Rolls-Royce engine waiting patiently outside. Inside the dealership, no one spoke. Dan stood still for a full 30 seconds. Then he looked over at the receptionist. Was that the kid from yesterday? She nodded slowly. He was polite, real polite. Dan exhaled. Call Eric. Have him meet me in my office. Now. Back at home, Roman was on his third YouTube review video about used Priuses. He didn't know what had just gone down. He wouldn't find out until later. For now, he was just trying to make peace with the fact that, for all his prep, all his focus, all his effort, he still got brushed off like he didn't matter. But things were already shifting behind the scenes. Sienna wasn't the kind of woman who fought every battle. She was the kind who chose them carefully and made sure they ended on her terms. That day, she'd chosen this one, not because her son needed saving, but because the world needed reminding. And the next move? That was already in motion. Roman didn't know anything had changed. Not yet. He spent most of that day glued to his laptop, flipping between dealership listings and YouTube car reviews. He kept refreshing the same 3 tabs, Car Gurus, Kelley Blue Book, and his banking app, as if something new might magically appear. His folder sat on the table next to him, slightly crumpled now. He hadn't opened it again since yesterday. In his head, the conversation from Westbridge Automart replayed like background noise. The tight smiles, the tone, the look in the salesman's eyes that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with assumption. But Roman had been raised to process, not explode. So he processed. He didn't hear the garage door open. Didn't notice his mom walk through the front door hours later, heels clicking softly against the tile floor. She passed the kitchen, paused when she saw him hunched at the dining table, then walked upstairs without a word. She didn't need to say anything yet. Roman was quiet, but Sienna could read quiet better than anyone. Meanwhile, across town, Dan Malcolm sat in his office, door closed, hands steepled beneath his chin. The black business card still sat on his desk, mocking him. He'd looked up, Dr. Sienna Hayes, the moment she left. Her LinkedIn alone read like a resume from a Marvel movie. Harvard, Stanford Medical, NIH Fellow, biotech patents, congressional testimony. It was one thing to misjudge a customer. It was another thing entirely to misjudge someone who could turn that mistake into a national headline, if she wanted to. Dan had seen people go viral for less, but that wasn't what shook him most. What got to him was how she never raised her voice, never asked for anything, never threatened lawsuits or reporters. She just looked him in the eye and made it impossible to unsee the mistake he'd made. He called in Eric. The salesman swaggered in like he didn't see the trap. Same red Crestview polo shirt, same clipboard, same smirk that had made its way into dozens of subtle rejections over the years. "You remember that kid from yesterday?" Dan asked. Eric gave a slight nod. "The one asking about the Civic?" "Yeah." "You turned him away?" Eric shrugged. "Told him to come back with someone who could actually buy." Dan didn't blink. He could actually buy. He had listings printed out. Cash ready. Bank verified. Eric chuckled lightly. "Well, he didn't look like it." Dan's voice dropped. "What exactly does someone who can buy look like to you?" Eric opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, the smirk slipped. Dan stood up slowly. "You embarrassed this dealership, not because you were rude, but because you were arrogant. You saw a young black man in sneakers and assumed you knew everything you needed to." "I was just doing my job," Eric muttered. "No," Dan replied. "You were doing what you've always done. And now it's costing us." He reached into his desk, pulled out a blank employee incident report, and placed it between them. "You're suspended, effective immediately. We'll be reviewing all your previous customer interactions. And if I find a pattern, one more family you turned away because of how they looked, you won't be coming back." Eric's face flushed. "Are you serious?" Dan stared at him. "Dead serious." Across the lot, a silver SUV rolled in. A black woman and her teenage daughter stepped out. Dan watched them for a beat too long, then turned back to Eric. "Go home." Back at the Hayes household, Roman finally closed his laptop and headed into the kitchen. His mom was already there, pouring tea into a matte black mug. She wore a navy t-shirt, soft cotton pants, and a calm expression. "Hey," he said. "Hey, baby," she replied. "Find anything decent?" "Maybe. There's a place on the east side that's got a decent Prius. Low mileage. Not too pricey." Sienna nodded. "Want me to go with you?" Roman hesitated. "I'm good. They answered my questions online. Didn't sound weird about cash either." She gave a faint smile. "That's a start." He leaned against the counter, hands stuffed in his hoodie pocket. "Did you talk to them at Westbridge?" Sienna didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I had a conversation." Roman gave a slow nod. "A big one? No yelling, no names, just truth." He looked down at the floor, then back up at her. "Did they listen?" "I think they heard me," she said. "Whether they listen depends on what they do next." He didn't press, and she didn't volunteer more. That was how they operated, never needing full explanations to understand the weight behind each word. "I didn't want it to be a thing," Roman said. "I didn't want to be that kid, you know?" Sienna stepped closer. "You weren't. You were the kid who came prepared, stayed calm, and walked away with your dignity. That's harder than yelling, and more powerful. Roman shrugged. Still felt like they saw through me. No, she said firmly. They saw what they wanted, and that's on them, not you. A long pause settled between them. Then he exhaled slowly. I think I want the Prius. She smiled. Then let's go get it. At Westbridge Auto Mart, the atmosphere was different that afternoon. The staff walked a little straighter, spoke a little softer. Dan had pulled the team aside. No corporate memo, no dramatic speech, just a direct conversation in the service bay. What happened yesterday can't happen again. Not on my watch. We treat every person who walks through that door with the same damn respect we'd give a CEO, because next time it might be one. The team nodded. Some looked away. Others looked guilty. A few looked like they were thinking hard for the first time in a while. Dan didn't care who felt uncomfortable. He cared that they finally saw the blind spots they'd been living in. Back at home, Roman sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the listing on his phone again. Then he tapped a button. Request test drive. 20 minutes later, a dealership on the east side replied with the time and a rep name. He smiled just a little. It wasn't about revenge. It was about knowing who he was and refusing to let anyone define that for him. That night, he slept better. Not because the world was fixed, but because he had found a piece of control inside it. And the real change was just getting started. The next morning came like any other. The Tennessee sky was still gray, the air still thick, but the energy in the Hayes home was different. Roman woke up earlier than usual, not out of excitement, but resolve. Today was a reset. He had a test drive scheduled at Riverstone Auto Group, a dealership on the other side of town that had actually treated him like a real customer, online at least. He threw on a clean t-shirt, dark jeans, and his newer pair of sneakers. As he stood in front of the mirror, he hesitated. Then he reached into his closet and pulled out a plain button-up, collared, neat, adult. Downstairs, Sienna was already dressed, not in her usual at-home wear, but something more business-sharp, slacks, blouse, and low heels. Roman stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "You coming with me?" he asked. "Only if you want me to," she replied without turning around. He paused. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." Sienna grabbed her keys. Not the Rolls. Today she picked her other car, an understated charcoal gray Lexus hybrid. Quiet, efficient, nothing flashy. Roman caught the switch, and though he didn't say it, he appreciated the gesture. Riverstone Auto Group looked nothing like Westbridge. The lot was wider, the windows clearer, and the welcome warmer. The moment they stepped onto the pavement, a young woman in khakis and a polo approached them. "Hi there," she said, smiling. "Welcome to Riverstone. You here to test drive the Sonata?" Roman blinked. "Yeah, I'm Roman. I set it up online last night." "Perfect," she said, shaking his hand like it actually mattered. "I'm Mia. I've got the keys and all the info ready inside. Want to check it out?" Roman looked at his mom, then nodded. "Let's do it." Inside, everything moved smoothly. Mia walked them through the vehicle's history, offered water without asking twice, and actually listened when Roman talked about what he wanted. A dependable car for school, something safe with good mileage. She didn't pitch luxury add-ons or talk past him like he was invisible. Sienna watched quietly, her face neutral but observant. Every now and then she'd add a soft suggestion or raise an eyebrow. Mia never flinched. Roman drove the Sonata for 15 minutes, looping past a few streets, testing the brakes, checking the Bluetooth. When he parked back at the lot, he turned off the engine and just sat there for a second, hands on the wheel. "How do you feel?" Sienna asked from the passenger seat. He looked over. "I like it. It feels like me." Mia was waiting for them back at the desk with a folder already prepared. "You're approved for the listed price, and since you mentioned cash purchase, we can waive a few admin fees," she said. Roman nodded slowly. "I'll think on it tonight. I'm not trying to rush." Mia smiled. "Take your time. We'll hold it through tomorrow if you're interested. Just let me know." Back in the Lexus, Roman exhaled like he'd been holding something in the whole time. His mother didn't say anything for a while, just let the quiet stretch. "That's what it's supposed to feel like," she finally said. Roman nodded, staring out the window. "I forgot it could feel like that." But while the Hayes family moved forward, the storm they'd left behind at Westbridge was just beginning to brew. Inside the dealership office, Dan wasn't finished. The HR director had flown in that morning from corporate, not for PR, for accountability. What happened here wasn't just a mistake, the director, a short black woman in her early 40s named Ms. Collier, said. It was a failure in judgment, in training, and in company culture. Eric had been officially placed on administrative leave pending further review. But even without the paperwork, most of the staff knew. His time was done. Dan stood beside Ms. Collier during the impromptu team meeting. "There's going to be mandatory bias and customer service training for every employee," he said, his voice firmer than before. "Effective this week. We're going to clean this up. Not because someone threatened us, but because someone didn't." The silence in the room was heavy. One of the junior salesmen, a Latino guy named Luis, raised his hand. "Are we going to issue a public statement?" Ms. Collier tilted her head slightly. "Doctor, Hayes didn't request one, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't acknowledge the harm." Dan added, "We'll discuss options, but understand this. It's not about optics anymore. It's about correction." Luis nodded slowly. So did a few others. But some just stared blankly, unsure if they were part of the problem or just bystanders too scared to call it out. Later that day, Dan sat alone in his office and pulled up the security footage from the day Roman had walked in. He watched it quietly, the way Roman had stood patiently, folder in hand, posture calm, the way Eric had barely looked at the papers, the way Roman had walked out without argument. Dan scrubbed forward to the next day, watched Sienna walk in like a storm in silence. No theatrics, no anger, just presence. He didn't flinch when she placed that black card on his desk, but now, days later, it felt heavier than ever. Meanwhile, back at the Hayes home, Roman stood in the driveway that evening, looking at the Lexus. He imagined what it might have felt like if that had been the car he drove off in, if the system hadn't tried to shut him out before he even had a chance to speak. He turned to his mom. "You think they'll actually change?" Sienna looked at him. "Some will, some won't. But they'll remember you." He considered that. "I didn't say anything, didn't even push back." "Exactly," she said. "Sometimes the way you leave says more than the way you show up." Roman didn't fully understand what that meant. Not yet, but part of him knew it was true. That night, he sat at his desk with the Sonata listing still open. The dealership had followed up with a polite email, thanking him for the visit and offering to hold the vehicle until noon the next day. He didn't respond yet. Instead, he opened another tab, Georgia Tech's orientation page, and scrolled through the checklist for incoming students. There were things to fill out, forms to sign, and prep work to begin. But now he was ready. Not just with a car, with something more important, a sense of control, and the clarity to never settle again for being unseen. By the following afternoon, the tension at Westbridge Auto had curdled into something bitter and hard to ignore. Word had spread not just through the dealership, but across local networks. A few whispers online, a couple of shared screenshots, and suddenly the incident with Roman Hayes was no longer just an internal embarrassment. It was becoming a story. Dan tried to stay ahead of it. He'd called in the staff again, this time to preemptively discuss damage control. But no one said much. It wasn't just about Roman anymore. It was about what it revealed. Meanwhile, Roman was sitting on his bed at home, laptop open, tapping out an email to Mia at Riverstone Auto Group. He reread the subject line 3 times before hitting send. "Let's go ahead with the purchase." A few minutes later, her reply came through, warm and professional. "That's great news, Roman. We'll prep the paperwork. You're making a solid choice." He should have felt thrilled, but something still sat on his chest like a weight. He closed the laptop and wandered downstairs. Sienna was in the kitchen, grinding coffee beans with calm precision. "You ready to head over there?" she asked, glancing at him. Roman hesitated. Yeah. She studied him. "You don't sound excited." "It's not that," he said. "It's just weird. Like I'm happy, but part of me's still stuck on what happened. Like I keep replaying it. Not because I'm mad anymore, but because I didn't expect it to hit that deep." Sienna stopped grinding. "That's because it wasn't just about the car." Roman nodded slowly. "It was about who they thought I was." There was a beat of silence between them. "And that's not your burden to carry," she said. "But it is something you'll learn to navigate. The key is not letting it shape who you become." She handed him the keys. "Let's go get your car." The paperwork at Riverstone was smooth. Mia offered them a private room to sign everything. The team treated Roman like any other buyer, not like a risk, not like a statistic. When he held the keys in his hand for the first time, it felt surreal. Outside, as they walked toward the newly detailed Sonata, Sienna paused. "I want to take a picture," she said. Roman blinked. "You serious?" "Yes," she smiled. "First car, first win." He leaned against the hood and smirked as she snapped the shot. Just one. No captions, no grand post, just proof. Not for others, but for them. Back at Westbridge, the storm finally broke. A local reporter had gotten wind of the story from a friend who worked in admin at the dealership. Nothing dramatic, just a tweet with the caption, "Ever heard of a dealership kicking out a teen with cash in hand? Well, they're about to." It didn't take long. Comments flooded in, some vague, some specific. And while Roman's name wasn't directly mentioned, enough pieces were there. The staff felt the shift immediately. Eric, still on administrative leave, showed up to the lot that afternoon, demanding to speak to Dan. "I didn't do anything wrong," he snapped, pacing in Dan's office. "The kid had no appointment. Looked like he was just wasting time." Dan didn't raise his voice. "You judged a customer before he said 10 words, Eric. That's not just bad practice. That's bias." Eric scoffed. "Oh, come on. You're gonna crucify me over one interaction." Dan stood. "Number, I'm addressing a pattern. You've had similar complaints before. You're just lucky this time the customer didn't go public with his name." Eric's face twisted. "So that's it? I'm the scapegoat?" Dan sighed. "You're the catalyst, and unfortunately, you're also the example." Outside, the receptionist, Karen, sat at her desk, nervously typing. She'd been the first one to speak to Roman, and she remembered clearly how little effort she'd made. She replayed it in her head, how she hadn't looked up from her screen, how dismissive her voice had been. Guilt crept in. That night, she sent an anonymous message to corporate, not about Roman, but about the environment. "It's not just one guy," she wrote. "We've been conditioned to assume who's serious and who's wasting time, and that assumption always tilts in one direction." Back at home, Roman sat on the back porch, the new car parked quietly in the driveway. He didn't take it out that evening, just sat with the moment. Elijah, his cousin, swung by with a six-pack of sodas and a grin. "Man, that ride is clean," Elijah said, nodding toward the Sonata. Roman smiled. "It's legit. Feels like mine." "You know people are already talking about it online," Elijah added. "Not you by name, but the whole situation. The dealership's getting dragged." Roman looked away. "I didn't want that." "I know," Elijah said, "but sometimes people need a mirror shoved in their face." Roman stayed quiet for a beat. "I didn't even tell them to apologize." "You didn't have to," Elijah said. "That's the power move." Inside, Sienna was on the phone, again. Not about the dealership, but with a national education nonprofit she advised part-time. They were discussing a new campaign highlighting youth resilience, and without using names, Sienna pitched the idea of showcasing a story about quiet strength. "Not every hero shouts," she told them. "Some just choose not to fight battles that aren't theirs and still end up changing the room." When she hung up, she looked out the window. Roman and Elijah were laughing now, the tension of the week starting to lift. And for a moment she let herself feel proud, not just of the win, but of the lesson that had landed without ever being shouted. Because in the quiet spaces, change was taking root, and that was exactly where it needed to start. The following morning started out like any other, but the energy inside Westbridge Auto was anything but normal. The staff spoke in hushed voices, glancing toward Dan's office, where a closed-door meeting was underway. No one had to guess what it was about. The silence, the sudden shift in tone, it all pointed to one thing. Someone higher up had caught wind of the damage. Dan stood at the head of the small conference table, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight. "We're not just facing a PR issue," he said, voice calm but firm. "We're facing a credibility issue. And I want to be clear, it's not going away quietly." Across the table, three other managers sat stiffly, absorbing his words. He dropped a printed stack of customer reviews on the table. "These are from the last 48 hours, Dan continued. "And while none of them mention Roman Hayes by name, they all say the same thing. This place judges you the second you walk in." "Some of these are old reviews resurfacing," one manager, Claire, offered weakly. Dan shot her a look. "Exactly. This isn't new. This is just the first time someone important noticed." Outside the glass walls of the conference room, Karen sat at the front desk trying to keep her eyes on her monitor, but her ears tuned in. She hadn't stopped thinking about that moment. Roman walking in, so polite, so prepared, and how she'd barely looked up. It wasn't intentional, but it had been automatic, and that's what bothered her the most. Later that afternoon, Roman drove the new Sonata across town, heading toward an open mic event at a small community center. Elijah had convinced him to come by, not to perform, but just to hang out. Roman wasn't sure why, but he agreed. When he pulled into the lot, he noticed the modest crowd already forming. Inside, the room buzzed with young voices, spoken word poetry, laughter, and storytelling. "You made it," Elijah grinned, walking over. "Come on, they've got a spot open." Roman raised an eyebrow. "I'm not reading anything." "You don't have to," Elijah said. "Just listen. This is where people speak their truth." Roman nodded, feeling a strange calm settle in. For the first time in days, he wasn't navigating someone else's assumptions. Just people, raw and unfiltered, sharing stories. That's when something clicked. He realized what had been bothering him most wasn't just the rejection. It was the silence that followed. No apology, no acknowledgement. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to change that. Back at home later that night, Sienna sat on the couch, scrolling through her inbox. One email caught her attention. Subject line: Westbridge Media Inquiry. She opened it, brow furrowing. A journalist from a local podcast wanted to speak with her, asking if she'd be willing to comment on an incident involving a dealership and her son. No names had been published yet, but somehow the dots had connected. She stared at the screen for a long time. When Roman came down to grab a snack, she looked up. "Hey, someone reached out," she said casually. "Media?" Roman asked, catching on quickly. "Yeah, podcast. Wants to talk." Roman paused. "What did you say?" "I didn't reply yet," she said. "I wanted to ask you first." He sat beside her. "I don't want to be the face of something just because people are mad for a week." "I get that," she said. "But this could be more than a moment." Roman thought for a beat. "What if we tell the story but make it bigger than me? Talk about patterns, about what it feels like to walk into a room and be dismissed before you even speak." Sienna smiled. "Now that's a story worth telling." The next day, Roman recorded a short segment for the podcast, anonymous at first. He didn't name the dealership, didn't mention his mom's status. He just spoke about being 18, being black, and how being prepared didn't always mean being respected. His voice was steady, thoughtful. "I wasn't mad," he said into the mic. "Not at first. I was confused. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong. But then I realized some people don't need a reason to doubt you. They just do." When the episode aired 2 days later, it went modestly viral. Not explosive, but enough to get shared across TikTok and Instagram stories. Enough to make other young people nod and say, "That happened to me too." And enough to finally make Westbridge Auto's upper corporate office issue an internal statement. Dan received it mid-morning. It wasn't just a reminder about values. It was a directive. Start inclusion training, restructure sales protocol, and review all walk-in policies. Later that evening, Dan called a staff meeting in the service bay, neutral ground, away from the polished sales floor. "I'm not here to throw anyone under the bus," he said, "but we all know we can do better." Chris, the red polo salesman who turned Roman away, stood at the back, arms folded. He looked uncomfortable, but this time he didn't try to defend himself. "I made a judgment," he admitted, "and I was wrong. That kid came in more prepared than half the people we finance. I didn't see it because I didn't look." Dan nodded slowly. "Then let this be where we start fixing that." Meanwhile, across town, Roman walked out to the driveway, keys in hand, watching the last light of the day fade across the hood of his Sonata. He didn't smile. He didn't pose. He just stood there for a moment, silent, grounded, and more sure of himself than ever. The world might still make assumptions, but now he had his own voice, and he was starting to use it. Chapter 7. The next few days moved fast, but something deeper began to stir beneath the surface. Roman didn't chase headlines, but headlines found him anyway. The podcast interview had been reshared by a prominent civil rights activist on Twitter, then featured on a TikTok account with nearly 1 million followers. The comments section lit up. Not with outrage, at least not only with that, but with recognition. "This happened to my brother last year. I walked out of a dealership in Atlanta for the same reason. This story hits different." It was no longer about Roman Hayes. It had grown into something bigger, a mirror for people who knew the exact sting of being prejudged, overlooked, pushed aside. And through all of it, Roman stayed grounded. He still made breakfast in the morning, still helped Elijah study for his trig quiz. But he wasn't the same kid who walked into Westbridge Auto a week ago, hoping for a test drive. Not anymore. Meanwhile, inside the dealership, the pressure kept mounting. Chris sat at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen. He'd made dozens of sales over the years, but now he felt every stare from his coworkers like a spotlight. No one said anything outright, but the energy had shifted. Dan's impromptu team meeting had made it clear. No more blind spots. No more excuses. The mistake had become public. And Dan, he wasn't looking to shield anyone from it. Mid-afternoon, a man walked in. Late 30s, dressed sharp, pressed shirt, wire-rimmed glasses, a business card tucked in his front pocket. He approached the reception desk. "Hi there, I'm Trey Caldwell from Equity Works Consulting. We're here to begin the inclusivity audit." Karen blinked. "Already?" He smiled, professional but pointed. "The parent company requested we move fast. You're on the calendar all week." Within the hour, small huddles formed. Employees grouped together whispering, side-eyeing the clipboard-carrying consultants walking the floor. Questions were being asked, sales data reviewed, security camera footage pulled. And right in the middle of it all, Chris was asked to step into Dan's office. He knew the second he sat down. Dan didn't yell. He didn't need to. "You know why you're here," Dan said. Chris nodded, staring at the edge of the desk. "I messed up." "No," Dan said. "You showed us the crack we've been ignoring. And now corporate wants action. We're restructuring, roles, training, accountability." Chris's voice was tight. "So I'm out?" "You're suspended, indefinitely," Dan said. "You'll still get the training modules like everyone else. What happens after that depends on how you show up." Chris exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. He also didn't fight it. That night, Sienna sat in her office going through emails when she came across a message that made her stop. Subject: a note of acknowledgement. From Westbridge Auto Corporate. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the short message. A formal apology. Not performative, but personal. They acknowledged Roman by name. They thanked her for raising a young man who showed more restraint and grace than most adults would in the same situation. They didn't ask her to appear in public, didn't offer discounts or favors, just something more valuable. Respect. She read the last line twice. "We failed him, but his story has already begun changing how we operate. Thank you for letting it speak." Downstairs, Roman was at the kitchen counter, flipping through a car maintenance manual. He'd started reading up on basic repairs, just for fun. When Sienna walked in, she held up her phone. "They finally said something," she said. He looked up. "Who?" "Westbridge." Roman nodded once. "What did they say?" She shrugged. "They said you made them look at themselves. Really look." He didn't smile, not fully. Just a thoughtful flicker of emotion in his eyes. "I didn't think it would go that far." Sienna leaned against the counter. "It always goes that far, whether we see it or not." Later that evening, Roman stepped outside and sat on the hood of his Sonata, phone in hand. Messages kept trickling in, friends from school, a cousin in Atlanta, even one from a stranger in Ohio. One message stood out. It was from a girl named Jayla. She was 17, about to graduate, and had watched the podcast with her older brother. She didn't have a fancy car. In fact, her family didn't even own one. But she wrote, "Hearing your story made me feel like I belong in places I thought were off limits." "Thank you." Roman read it 3 times. He didn't reply right away. He just stared out at the quiet street, the glow from the porch light casting long shadows over the driveway. In that moment, he understood something new. The real win wasn't the car. It wasn't even the apology. It was the ripple. The change he hadn't planned for, but welcomed all the same. He was no longer invisible. And more importantly, neither were the others who saw themselves in him. The next day, Roman and Sienna drove across town to meet with a nonprofit director at a youth empowerment group. They wanted to invite Roman to speak at a mentorship workshop for high school boys. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that," Roman said on the way there. Sienna glanced over. "You're exactly the right person, not because you had something unfair happen to you, but because you handled it with clarity." Roman looked out the window, taking it in. He didn't want to be famous. He didn't want interviews or a platform. But maybe, just maybe, he could lend his voice where it mattered. Not for credit, but for change. And that, he realized, was something he'd carry far longer than any car ever could. Roman stood on the stage of a modest community center gym in South Nashville. The folding chairs in front of him were filled with teens, mostly young black boys, a few Latinx and white students too, all from different neighborhoods, but sharing the same look in their eyes: quiet defense. The look kids wear when they've had to grow up navigating assumptions before they even speak. He wasn't nervous. Not anymore. The mic in his hand felt less like a spotlight and more like a baton. Something to pass on, not hold. He cleared his throat and began. I didn't come here today to tell you I handled everything perfectly. I didn't come to brag about a car or how people change their minds. I came because I know what it's like to walk into a room and feel like you have to prove you deserve to be there. The room went still. A couple kids leaned forward. One crossed his arms tighter but didn't look away. That morning I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just left. And for a while I felt like I'd failed, like maybe I should have done more. He paused, choosing his next words with care. But I learned something after that. Sometimes the quietest actions echo the loudest. Sometimes dignity, your dignity, is louder than any insult. He looked out over the crowd, his voice steady but low. And sometimes people need to be reminded of who they're dealing with. The crowd didn't erupt. It didn't need to. There was a shift, though, a crack in the walls these boys had been forced to build too early. Roman handed the mic off to the organizer and stepped down, greeted by a ripple of nods, fist bumps, even a few thanks. In the back of the room, Sienna watched with a pride she didn't need to voice. She had raised a son who didn't need to be the loudest in the room to own it. That evening, back at home, they sat on the front porch. The sky was soft, streaked with pinks and oranges, the cicadas buzzing in rhythm with the distant hum of cars. Roman sat cross-legged on the porch swing, sipping sweet tea. Sienna scrolled on her phone, then looked up. They posted a follow-up. Who? Roman asked. Westbridge, their corporate page, a full statement, real accountability, not just PR stuff. She handed him the phone. Roman read it silently. The post didn't just mention his name, it described the broader changes the company was implementing. Internal training, new leadership policies, a commitment to working with local youth empowerment groups. They actually did it, he said quietly. Sienna nodded. You did it, by being exactly who you are. He handed her the phone back, and they fell into a comfortable silence again. Later that night, Roman sat in his room, the Civic parked outside, reflecting the last bit of moonlight. His inbox was flooded with messages again. One stood out, a letter from a high school senior in Kansas. I used to think people like me didn't belong in certain places. After your story, I walked into a dealership yesterday and asked for a test drive. They gave it to me. No hesitation. Maybe it wasn't a big deal to them, but it was everything to me. Thank you. Roman leaned back in his chair, letting the words settle. He wasn't trying to be a symbol, but maybe that's exactly why it worked. Meanwhile, Dan sat alone in his Westbridge office. He'd stayed late again, the dealership dark except for his corner light. He looked out at the lot, saw the Civic, detailed, priced fairly, keys hanging on a reserve tag in the office. He'd kept it untouched. He didn't know if Roman would ever come back for it. That wasn't the point anymore. He took out a plain envelope and slid in a note. Simple, handwritten. To Roman Hayes, you reminded us that perception isn't reality, and that the people we overlook today may be the very people who help us see clearer tomorrow. With respect, Dan Grissom. He sealed the envelope and placed it in the outgoing mail tray. Back at the Hayes home, Sienna stood by the kitchen window. She looked out at her son, sitting on the hood of his car, earphones in, watching the sky. The same sky she used to stare at when she worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Back when people told her she'd never make it, that she was too ambitious, too intense, too black, too everything. But here they were, not because the world handed it to them, but because they didn't wait for permission to take up space. The next morning, Roman went for a drive. Not far, just a loop around the neighborhood. He didn't blast music, he didn't film himself. Just him, the road, and the soft hum of a reliable engine beneath him. He stopped at a light near the school where he used to volunteer for robotics club. A group of kids waited to cross the street. One boy noticed him, did a double take, then smiled and pointed. Roman rolled down the window. "You the dealership guy, right?" Roman grinned. "Something like that." The boy nodded, then ran to catch up with his group. Roman sat for a second, the light turning green. He wasn't famous, but he'd become something rarer, respected, and that would always matter more. As the screen fades to black, a message lingers. Dignity doesn't need volume, and power doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is show up, speak truth, and leave a door open for the next person who looks like you. If this story moved you, share it. Let it remind others that quiet strength is still strength, that the way we treat people matters, and that real change begins when we stop assuming and start seeing. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us who we are.